So a lot of the B2B SaaS startups tend to assume that they could just get started with search ads and mainly Google ads. But if you're marketing your startup, have you assessed whether it suits the economics of your business? Does it make sense to deploy the tactic as part of your overarching strategy? Are you even sure it's going to work in the first place? How can you make sure? The real issue is that you may not have the right infrastructure or method to forecast whether this demand capture strategy is a viable tactic for you or not. And without this, you usually find that like other SaaS startups, you will blow a lot of money right out of the gate and you later realize that it's not very ROI friendly for your business. And that's why I'm going to show you how I determine whether Google Ads or search ads platforms are good fits for your marketing infrastructure using a systematic forecasting and opportunity analysis methodology. And this forecasting approach has helped me help my clients make informed decisions about whether PPC search ads are a good fit for the business or not, preventing thousands of dollars in wasted spend. Hey, so for those of you who are new, I'm Neil. I'm a former IT consultant turned growth marketing consultant who helps early to growth stage B2B startups in the SaaS industry for nearly a decade now. And my background has actually taught me how to consider channels like PPC search ads and how to apply systematic infrastructure-based thinking to marketing. So a lot of you SaaS founders or marketers may try to deploy Google ads or random marketing tactics specifically based on popularity or gut feeling without forecasting or building an infrastructure to make those data-driven decisions. For example, a Google ads budget isn't about how much you have or how much you can outspend the competitors, but it's more so about whether it works for your conversion rates, your sales cycle, and your core business metrics. All right, so now I'm actually going to go ahead and switch over to a visual demonstration where I'll show you exactly the forecasting approach that we want to be. Okay, just realized that that's been in the shot the entire time. Anyway, so before spending anything at all, we need to understand if there is potential to generate revenue, right, in this initiative. And that's important to you because that's what we need at the very beginning, revenue, especially if you're on a budget and you're given a run rate by your finance team or the board or investors, right, based off of the timeline that you're given. And so we need to make sure that Google Ads, which is the channel that we're focusing on right now, is a data-driven decision as to whether we go ahead with it or not, and not just an emotional one, and certainly not the follow the crowd, vague advice that's given to you because it's worked for other SaaS startups. And so you need to understand why you would leverage search ads in the first place. And that's because you know it's a way for us to capture demand, right? The demand that exists when you search something is someone that's already searching for those terms. They already know about something, a problem maybe, a solution, a brand name. They might go to the spot, to the search engine, or to even AI, right? In these days, like ChatGPT, Gemini, or anything like that, and they will go and search for the query, and that's essential demand that's already there for a specific purpose or for a specific intent to acquire some information with something that they're looking for. So with this tactic, you know it's a demand capture tactic, therefore you will need to understand if there's demand in the first place, and you need to consider if it makes sense. And that's where this opportunity analysis comes in. The things that you need to actually consider to make this happen is your keyword research and volume analysis, which I've talked about in previous video, for example, or in other videos, where you understand the demand before spending. That keyword research helps you understand the demand before spending anything. And then we've got the multiple conversion rate scenarios. That's another facet of this. And that's so that you can take a conservative approach, you can take a realistic approach, and you can also take an optimistic approach to projections of, based off of the keywords and the demand and the volume out there, what can you capture based on your benchmarks, your conversion rates, and then from there, what that could look like or what that could project to moving forward. And then the next is how to factor in the B2B sales cycle, which affects everyone in the B2B SaaS industry, especially those enterprise selling businesses. And why? For someone that has a longer sales cycle will affect the accuracy of your actual spend. So longer sales cycle tend to affect your forecasting accuracy because you know that it might take a longer period of time for your business specifically to realize an ROI from the actual initiative versus another business that has a much shorter sales cycle. That's why you can't just take advice from another SaaS startup as gospel, because the economics of your business differ. And lastly, of course, which I always talk about, is the statistical significance factor, right? You need enough data to make the decision in the first place. If you have enough data in the first place to actually say, okay, I believe this data, it's conclusive, and therefore we can move ahead with this sort of tactic, strategy, or even overall initiative. So as part of the strategy, you'll notice that we always talk about the bottom of the funnel infrastructure budget strategy, right? So that's focused on, in the beginning, you know that you want to test things out. Therefore, you need to understand how the demand stacks up for you, or what demand is available to you for capture, but in the bottom of the funnel scenarios. So in terms of the intent out there, the people searching for those queries, are your customers already looking for a solution like yours? Are they looking for anything close to a product like yours, or your brand, or a competitor's brand, that sort of thing? So that's where we focus on a bottom of the funnel strategy first. And the reason why startups should actually build their Google Ads infrastructure focusing on high intent keywords first is because that's where you can sort of validate whether it's going to work for you in the first place or not, right? If there's already demand for you, fantastic. You can tend to capture that demand and then see how effective it is in getting as many leads and as many prospects as you can, or deals in the pipeline, right? And then obviously revenue closed and what you can attain from that. And next, budget allocation for an exact match campaign is always going to be your best bet in the beginning, because you're being very specific about the keywords and you're deploying budget to a laser focused area, people that already know about the solution, the brand, and anything that's relevant to the intent of, hey, I want to buy your product, or I want to see a product, or your software, I should say in this case. And that's where you're talking about, it allows you to sort of start with that sort of control and precision in the very beginning, which stops you from wasting any spend. And so next, another consideration you need to take into place is the infrastructure requirements for that systematic budget optimization piece. And so that's like, do we have landing pages, tracking, and conversion rates available to us in order to carry out this analysis in the first place? Lastly, of course, you need to understand how this connects to your marketing infrastructure overall. So as part of your demand capture strategy, is it treated as an isolated tactic? Yes or no? It shouldn't be an isolated tactic. It needs to really mean something to those users, right, that are looking for you. So when you deploy this tactic, whatever you're deploying in terms of ad, in terms of landing page copy or images or content overall, it's got to mean something to those users. So you need to understand whether you have these resources available to even provide them with what they're looking for. So we're going to actually walk through actual forecasting with real numbers, and that's using the opportunity analysis template I was talking about. And I learned this a long time ago, and I've sort of modified it and improved it and come up with my own version. And so that when I learned this methodology, I thought, hey, this is technically great to bring in and help SaaS startups specifically understand, founders like yourselves, or lead marketers like yourselves, understand exactly how to forecast or do an opportunity analysis of how good the channel is for you and whether it fits into your marketing infrastructure. But first things first is, I'm not going to go through the keyword research portion because I've done plenty of videos on that. So I'll try and link it below. And I would recommend tools like SEMrush, by the way. And I think it can give you an extended free trial. So it's longer than the regular trial that you'd get if you use like an affiliate link. And of course, if you do sign up, you'd get some kickback to do some keyword research. But I've got quite a few good tutorials on how to use free tools and also the paid tools like SEMrush. So go and check those out. But you would need to run keyword research in the very beginning, especially across the high intent terms that you want, and you want to get those results, get the volumes, get your clicks, the estimated CTR, click-through rate, things like that, right? And then what you want to do is you want to get the volume projections, which is that the impressions and the amount of people you're expecting to sort of see. And then you want to get a lot of your business metrics ready. So MRR, for example, is your monthly recurring revenue, and it's what you expect as an estimate on how much you expect a single customer to bring in revenue every month for you, right? So let's say that we're going to do this at $600. You need these metrics because this is what the economics of your business is in the beginning, especially to run this as a phase 1 test, right? Then you need what the expected, let's say, LTV is. So in this case, it was 24 months, right? So you would mark up the MRR to 24 months, which is automatically calculated in. So we know that lifetime value is essentially how long the customer typically stays as a customer before they churn. but this is dependent on obviously your business and what you offer. But then when you look at the CPA, it's different, right? So you're looking at exactly how much it costs to acquire that customer, which is generally your MRR times 12. And this, you can use these metrics, but again, adjust the formulas based off of your business. And then look at the ad spend, right? How much do you expect to spend on ads every month? How much do you have to deploy? Do you have any set aside? What we're trying to do is we're trying to assess whether this amount of ad spend is viable. If we have a budget for ad spend on search ads, how much would we like to deploy? How much do we have willing to test with, willing to give up? And you're trying to look at what opportunity is available to you to capture that demand that we talked about using, let's say, Google Ads, because it's a demand capture strategy. And you're looking at how much you want to deploy per month. Now we move on to the results per month, which is, let's say we want our one customer per month, right? So that's our ad spend divided by our cost per acquisition. So for the amount of spend that we deploy, how much can we expect to spend to acquire a customer? So let's say in this case, we're doing one. Normally you'd use a formula, but I am using the minimum viable amount so that you can understand exactly how much you can deploy. And that's one, let's say, just to get one customer, right? As a result, what we want to look at, what the metrics, how the metrics sort of stack up, how the forecast stacks up, how the opportunity stacks up. And so we're looking at that would normally be the new customers you expect to generate. If it is less than one, then just leave it as one so you can understand how much it costs to generate one customer. Next, new MRR. So what that would mean is the subscribers times the MRR. So based off of these number of new customers, how much MRR do we expect to generate? So monthly recurring revenue. And that is precisely 600 because we stated that MRR is 600 for one customer earlier on. What's the end result we expect? So the total ad spend, which I've done, which is multiplied by, of course, 3 months. And that's like essentially, typically you need this much to test and learn and understand how much of the performance data you can get that's trustworthy. Usually it's 90 days to perform an experiment, but take this with a pinch of salt because you'll have to adjust it based off of the time that you have and what budget you have, etc. And you try to get to as close to 90 days as possible. If you're running ads for like $50, and I can't imagine that being realistic, so I wouldn't do that. So now for continuing the end result, so total revenue generated. Essentially, this will fall into like the total ad spend, but we're looking at how much revenue is generated based off of the total ad spend after 3 months and after you acquired that customer, right? Lastly, ROI. So based off of this entire calculation with these metrics and these assumptions to a degree as well with the one customer, this ROI actually just plain and simple helps us understand whether it works out for our business or not, right? And generally higher ad spend, and costs work out for companies with higher average MRR and less for lower MRR. So you know that if you're someone that has so let's say you have a B2B SaaS product, but you're only charging $10 a month. That is ridiculous, right? To try and use Google Ads to try and scale the users, unless you're optimizing for users only in the beginning and you're looking at maybe becoming more profitable on the back end and your initial strategy is a rapid user uptake or rapid user signups. So that's more of a go-to-market and business strategy. But in this event, you would actually look at whether it's viable or not. And in this sense, it's actually minus 60%. So at 60%, that will be our loss, right? Like essentially out the gate, we lose 60% instead to when we've deployed that ad spend for those 3 months and when we've only generated one customer. So that's what it means. But this is where you mess with things and you say, if I generated 3 customers, hey, well, straight away, it goes up to 20%. You get a 20% ROI and you might be okay with, as you put in the ad spend of 4,500 over the 3 months, you're okay with getting 3 customers out and having only a 20% gain in terms of ROI. So again, look at what it costs to bring in one and then move on. Now, from our keyword research, we move over to the second part, which is the search ads. And that's to essentially put in the keywords here or your ad groups here. And these are conversion rate scenario 1, 2, and 3. If I deployed on brand or whatever, and then you plug in your potential volume here and your clicks here, and if you have benchmarks, your CTRs, right, to calculate things, if you know those benchmarks. If you don't, leave it. Then you look at, okay, I'm looking to spend or spread out my money, let's say of $150 for one campaign over another, you might be more bullish on certain terms versus another set of terms that are high intent. Therefore, you would probably optimize spend initially in the beginning for that, because later on, once you've got some data, you'll be able to understand, hey, I actually am getting more results from another campaign, but I've got less budget on that campaign. Therefore, I'm going to take some budget from the lower performing ad group or keyword, and I'm going to move it over to the higher performing one, right? And with this, similarly, we would plug in the average CPC numbers we get from our keyword research, right? You tend to figure out which one's more valuable by seeing a higher CPC versus others, right? Because other people are bidding on them. Then you got your conversion rate. Now, this is the important part. We want to look at what your conversion rate is. And this is where you take in the conservative, which is this scenario here. Then you take in your realistic. So you notice I've got 1.2% as a conversion rate here. And then I've got 2% here. And I've got 3% here, right? So this is our conservative, realistic, and then our optimistic, right? And we'll look at how much conversions are done based off of that. So then once you've plugged in these numbers, we have this sheet here, which focuses on the ratio analysis, which is your CAC to LTV. So based off of those three scenarios and the conversion rates, right? And by the way, that we just talked about the budgets that you deploy, again, equal across all, right? Equal across all, same spread and everything, same combination. Let's move on to the final one, and that's your budget requirements for each scenario. And so now what you would do is you would go through each scenario and say, okay, I'm going to edit. So I've also put help into these, which is normally what I use. And I've put some notes. And so what happens is we want to plug in, for example, with scenario 1, how it would look only, and then it will carry over to scenario 2 and 3 because it's just picking up the conversion rates from the previous tab. And so we want our total salaries because we want to increase the accuracy, of course, and be financially responsible from your startup's perspective, because you need to know the true cost. You are speaking to your finance team, you're speaking to your board of directors, your investors. You want to make sure you keep tabs on startup costs, the amount that's being invested, the amount that's being deployed across your initiatives. So you need to consider salaries. Next is the cost of tools. Again, you want the most accurate cost here. So you want to understand true impact. So if you did go ahead with all of this, what salaries would you have to include to be involved with this initiative? What cost of tools would be involved? And then what other types of ad spend would you need to be involved? So right now we're just assessing Google ads, so we can leave this as 0, but in the future, you can add things like your Facebook ads, your LinkedIn ads, your Microsoft ads, whatever the case may be. Now, lastly, search ad spend. We know that's pulled from the previous tabs, essentially, but it will tell us what the total is from before, right? We don't need to edit any of these cells, but let's say that, for example, we have, why does it say 2,500? It should say, I will mess with this, but it should say 1,500. And so what we have here is the total, right? Which is the sum of all of these, how much it costs. And then what in terms of non-Google ads, new customers, we want to punch in the number we expect. So enter the number of customers from channels outside of search ads for last month on average. So how many customers we acquired last month. And then we look at the Google ads new customers that we expect based off of the conversion rates, by the way, which is important. And then once we've done that, we'll notice that we have a total, right? Which is the total of customers that we expect from both. And then we come up with our customer acquisition cost, which is auto-calculated, which takes into account if we have this many customers, let's say, based off of the total of the salaries and spend and cost of ad spend, whatever the case may be, we'll look at how much it costs to acquire the customer. So if we had this many in total, right, this is how much the customer acquisition cost would be. But in terms of customer lifetime value, we also need to understand what the value is from the key business metric sheet, which is at the very beginning. And this considers actually the true value based on how long the average customer stays a customer. And what we said in the beginning was the LTV would be about 14,400 because we expect them to stick around at 600 MRR for about 2 years, so 24 months. Therefore, we would punch this number in here and we'll notice that there's a CAC to LTV ratio of 323, right? And as you know, scenario 2, how it looks at the realistic conversion rate. So this is worst case scenario, right? The most conservative approach. This is the most realistic approach. We know that it's 349, and we know that in scenario 3 it's actually 364. So I've fixed that formula so it's back and it's more realistic, you'll see. But essentially what you want to do is, let's say that in terms of other customers, all you do is you get let's say you get 2 customers, right? Let's make this more realistic. You only get 2 non-Google Ads customers outside of this. If we make this realistic and we say, okay, we know that our LTV actually is about, let's say, $1,200, right? So they only stay with us for 2 months. Look at how the scenarios change. So you know that in order to get a customer lifetime of just $1,200, so that's 2 months. If you acquire the one customer from Google Ads, apparently the CAC to LTV ratio is so low. You can see that's red, right? And these are already programmed in. I've programmed them in. But essentially, you know that, hey, you need to achieve scenario 3 of a 3% conversion rate for everyone that you're driving to your landing page in order for you to get a decent CAC to LTV ratio. And now you can mess with your own benchmarks. Of course, you can get this from like online when you're doing some research on what your particular industry benchmark is. At first, if you don't have any data at all, you would use industry averages at the very beginning, and then you'd move on to other types of benchmarks like your own. The whole point at the beginning, when you're in startup phase, is to use industry benchmarks or market benchmarks in your specific space as close as you can until you get enough data so that you can have your own benchmarks. So you can then start to be like, I want to improve this benchmark or not. And that's what optimizations are later on. Right. So that's the sheet. I can run through this again in a lot of detail, but I sort of wanted to give you a run through of how it would look, right? It's good to mess around with a sheet and see how things look for you. I'm actually just giving you guys this. So, just let me know if you have any questions at all. Always is. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, etc. for this. But anyway, this is the analysis sheet. This tells me that if I was running at 1200, I probably wouldn't consider it unless I'm going to get the 3%. So it's a very low CAC to LTV ratio. Let's say hypothetically, we didn't get any customers. How would it look, right? If we didn't have any customers from any other channels and you were only trying to get new clients or generate new pipeline using Google Ads, this is how it would look if you close that pipeline. So with 28 new customers based off of that conversion rate, you are going to experience 29.57, of course, in the realistic, which is pretty decent, I guess. And then 44.4, you are going to see if you can try to push your conversion rate to 3%. And that's where efficiency comes in. That's where optimizations comes in. Okay, so that's the sheet. We're going to stop there. Now, you don't want to proceed when it's low, like I showed you. When it gets in the red zone, you want to sort of, if you're okay with it, that's fine, because you're really hungry to optimize for users first. And then you're hoping that your LTV kicks in for a longer period of time, 3-4 years maybe. Crazy, by the way, that LTV. But that's when you would then go for something like that, if it makes sense and with the economics of your business, your software, your sales cycle, your conversion rates, and your LTV, right? And if your forecast, your opportunity analysis here actually shows you that you have insufficient volume or ROI, I would wait. I would not go ahead with it. And you would look at try alternative platforms, alternative tactics that you would consider to try and capture any demand or generate any demand in the beginning. That's how I would look at this opportunity analysis. And if you take thinking to your other platforms, you'll have much more surety on your deployment of spend, of budget, of staying in line with run rate as defined by the finance team. But you'll be much more confident in where you're investing, why you're investing there. And you've just understood why people would deploy in Google Ads in the first place, because it's a demand capture tactic in the beginning. So just to recap, in terms of how to use the forecasting and opportunity analysis template, you want to input your keyword research data first, then you want to apply your conversion rate assumptions as I showed you, and you want to factor in your sales cycle length, your LTV, your MRR, your CPA, all of those things you want to find out. And it's very easy to find the calculations on how to calculate each of those things if you don't know already. And then you want to calculate your budget requirements based off of that. And once done, right, you need to consider the following things. And that's, your minimum viable budget for testing. What is that going to be? It'll allow you to understand that too. What you need to reach that level of statistical significance so that you can be confident in the data and you can take the data to make a data-driven decision as to whether you should deploy Google Ads or not. And then you want to make sure that when you've done this exercise, you understand that the key metrics to track for budget optimization, you stay on top of that. And if anything changes, apply it to your template and then look at doing the same thing for other channels, right? And try to track your actual performance versus your forecasted performance moving forward after this. So once you've deployed something, if the data looks good, go and look at how your performance is tracking. Was it as expected? Is it not as expected? Why is that? If you feel like it's not working, switch it off just quickly, either decrease the budget or switch it off and then assess why it's going wrong and then look at retesting, right? And then when to scale versus when to pivot is based off of, using forecasting as an ongoing validation tool. So if you reuse this, you'll be able to understand when to scale something because there's more opportunity available to you or there's no opportunity at all. And that's what this sheet also tells you. So it's almost like an all-in-one. So for you aspiring marketers, get the forecasting and opportunity analysis template to master the strategic planning element of your marketing infrastructure setup. And this systematic approach is actually going to set you apart in the market. And for you SaaS founders, download the opportunity analysis template for your SaaS startups decision-making approach. And consider joining the waitlist for a potential marketing infrastructure workshop I'll be holding for technical founders or founders overall, where I plan on teaching you the complete system for setting up your marketing infrastructure, including this systematic approach to Google Ads planning. Okay, so once you've validated demand through your forecasting and the opportunity analysis, watch my video on how to deploy Google Ads strategically on a small budget so it can help you get ahead on how to deploy that small budget more effectively. Thanks for watching and we'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy and see you soon.